Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Chit Chat with Shehla. I'm your host, Shehla Saeed Akhtar. It's the 9th of April 2021, and this morning saw the sad demise of Prince Philip, His Royal Highness. I have been doing this show on my Facebook group, Energy Room Share. And the whole purpose and intention behind this live was to get empowered women on as guests for them to share their journeys, their stories, or their helpful advice or tips, and for other women to get uplifted through that. So today I changed the format a bit. I'm doing this as a live on my own personal Facebook page because I just feel there's a wider audience, and the guest we have has remarkable pieces of information to share. It should reach out to more people, men and women both. So our beautiful guest is known to many. She was called to bar 30 years ago and has specialized as an immigration and family law barrister. She has also been an established broadcaster and has presented over 1,000 live and recorded interactive legal shows. So I'm sure you can sense my nervousness around interviewing such an established, esteemed guest. She has also written a self-help book by the name of A Love Letter to Men and Women, and we will talk a bit about that when our guest is on. So I want to tell all of you who have logged in, please do stay tuned in. You can ask questions, you can put comments down. Let's make this interactive. However, our guest is not here to give any legal advice. So let's waste no time and welcome Huma Price. Assalamu alaikum, Huma.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you?
I'm a little bit sad, with the prince. He was only 2 months away from being 100 years old. So it's quite a sad day.
It is a sad day, yes. And when I found out, I thought, oh, okay. But life must go on. We had to go ahead with the show. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. And I hope I did justice to your introduction.
Well, it's all factual to me. So whatever you said is sort of true. I'm a barrister and I have written a book and so on and so forth. So it was very apt. And thank you so much. And please don't be nervous.
That I'll tell you later.
There's nothing to be nervous about. We're both equal. We're going to have a chat. Hopefully the viewers are going to learn something. And that's what it's all about, sharing information with each other, because information is power. The more information we have, the more powerful we are. Ignorance is a very weakening thing. And sadly, ignorance is what leads to weakness.
So true. So true. So Huma, tell us about how did you come about to the decision of pursuing law? And it was immigration first and then a switch to family law. How did that come about?
It's a very, very long story, but essentially, if I can tell you in a few words, when I was a child, around 11, 12, my parents divorced and we had to go to court. And the nicest people I ever met were the barristers in court because they were very concerned about me and my welfare. And it was a very difficult time for any child when parents are not together. And it was an extremely acrimonious divorce. So I kind of had this feeling that I want to be a barrister, but I didn't know how I would go about it, what I would do. So it was a long journey, but I got there in the end. And I'm so happy that I did. I have really used my education to spread legal knowledge. That's one of the big purposes of my life, is to spread knowledge, particularly legal, as I have a little bit more of that than other types of knowledge. But I'm still learning, even about the law, really. We're always learning.
We're always learning. So immigration and then family law. How
Yes,
did
but
that come
I
about?
actually specialize. You see, the thing about the law is you have to do a lot of studying, you have to do a lot of work, whichever area you specialize in, because laws change every day. You see, the law is not static. An act that was relevant 30 years ago may not be relevant today. So we have to keep studying to keep up to date with our profession. And if you try to specialize in too many areas, then you end up not knowing anything that well. So it's like jack of all trades rather than master of one. So my pupillage was in immigration, and I quite liked it. And I felt that I could use more of my skills in immigration because I'm also multilingual. So it was sort of almost natural that I went into practice immigration once I had qualified. And I've done it for a very long time. And family actually happened by accident, really, because immigration was made very, very difficult from 2012 onwards. And the cases decreased. So I had to find another area of law that I could practice so I could continue working, and it just sort of developed into family law. Initially, I thought I might not be able to practice it as impartially as I had practiced immigration, because I had myself had gone through a very bad acrimonious divorce with my parents. But once I got into it, I realized that my own experiences actually add to my work, and they make it easier for me because I have a lot of empathy with the clients, and I also have the expertise to help them, so the two go hand in hand.
That's great. In fact, Huma, when you mentioned, I just thought I'd add, it's so important. People think that the lawyer is just there to defend your case or to just put the facts together and make a case around it. From personal experience, when I went through my divorce, I think I spoke to, as we do, we speak to lawyers and about three or four, and finally I settled with the one who was very compassionate because she was listening to me, and that stayed with me,
Listen,
and that actually helped me through the process.
yeah, listening skills are very, very important, but I think I also need to tell your viewers something very important here, which is very basic, but a lot of people still don't really understand. You see, solicitors and barristers are two different types of lawyers. When you have an issue, you go to a solicitor, and the solicitor sees if he or she can deal with it and resolve it for you. If they can't resolve it and they need to go to court to get an independent judge to look at both sides of the matter, then they need a barrister who specializes in that area. So typically, in one of my immigration cases, somebody would make an application either for entry clearance in their country to whichever consulate is there, or they would make an application to the Home Office, to the Secretary of State in England. Now, if that application is approved and the client gets whatever they want, that's fine. The matter ends with the solicitor. The barrister only comes in when the matter becomes contentious and the client is not given what they want from the department they've applied to, and they need to go to court for an independent judge to see whether the case has been dealt with lawfully and fairly. You see, in courts, we are supposed to apply the law, but we're also supposed to apply it in a way that does justice. So the barrister comes in at the point where a judge needs to be convinced. So a barrister makes submissions in court. They're the advocates in the case. And barristers are not always needed. It's only when the case goes to court. And barristers don't have direct access with clients. It's the solicitors. So solicitors are trained slightly differently. They are the ones who take all the money, and we're the ones who fight the cases.
Oh, that's good.
We're
So, sorry, were you saying something?
fight for justice.
Fight
They
for
want
justice,
money.
absolutely. You do the hard work. Studying and practicing law is hard, and like medical education, and like you mentioned before, you have to keep abreast with knowledge, keep updating your skills. How did you manage to fit that a family and your social life in with that? And any tips for men and women who are aspiring to juggle family and professional life together?
Well, I am actually very, very blessed because I don't think many women out there have a husband like mine. His
Oh,
biggest skill is that he can cook. So
oh
he's
wow.
never actually needed me to be around to cook for him. And although it doesn't sound like a lot, it really does free you if you don't have to make your schedule around your husband's lunchtime and making hot chapatis for him when he comes home from work. It really does make a
That's so
difference.
true.
A lot of women used to say to me, "Oh, how comes you go to that ghazal party? How comes you manage to go to that mushaira?" They couldn't understand how I could keep up with so many things. And I said, "Well, the difference is you have to stay at home to feed your husband. My husband is quite capable of feeding himself, so I can go out and have fun." In fact, he even cooks for me quite often.
Oh, that's nice. That's very handy. Okay. Um, I was going through some of your interviews where you were being interviewed, and in quite a recently conducted one, that you mentioned most of your clients are male, and in our conversation earlier, you mentioned men are suffering and are deprived of seeing or spending time with their children at times post divorce, post separation. It's so important children get that time to spend equally with each parent, provided it can be done so. What have you seen as being the major reason, particular to that kind of area? Is it a power struggle? Is it like a revenge from women? Would you want to shed light on that?
Well, I think it's really important to distinguish here that the situation is totally different in Pakistan or India or any Asian country to what it is in England. I think a lot of people suffer when they come here after marriage, a lot of men in particular, because they're not really aware of the culture in England, particularly in the family courts. First of all, there is a lot of protection for women in this country, effective protection in terms of injunctions you can get, how you can exclude violent men from the home, from seeing children. And this was a real problem a lot of the time in the past. There was a lot of violence, there was a lot of unfairness, and women really suffered. But in the West, particularly in England, a lot of women's groups campaigned and they managed to get a lot of protection for women. So the situation in England is totally different. In England, men are vulnerable when it comes to family breakdown. They are the ones who usually have to leave their home, which has been their home for 20 years, 10 years, whatever. And many times they have to continue paying for their wife and children to keep living there. Um, it's a real problem for those men who come from countries where there is patriarchy, because in patriarchy, usually men are head of families and what they want happens. They're usually in control. And when they come to England and they find that they're not actually in control, it's a very difficult situation. There's also a cultural issue here because in Pakistan, where I come from and that I go to quite often, and I think in India as well to a great extent, there is a phrase, log kya kahenge, what will people say, which affects everyone and they live in fear of that. There is a lot of social pressure in these countries for people to behave in a particular way. That pressure doesn't really exist in England. People who live very much within isolated communities, maybe, but the large majority of Asians work in mainstream organizations and they're not that affected by this log kya kahenge. So, for example, in one of my cases, a woman had brought a husband over from Pakistan. They were both getting on really well. They had children. They were a happy family. But the girl's mother, who was a widow, decided that she wanted to get married again. Now, this became a very big issue for the husband because he said to his wife, "What will my parents say? What will my family say if your mother in her budhapa," and she might have been 50, 55, you know, goes and gets married again? And that was very much an honor issue. And
Okay.
gradually, because of that, it escalated. And in the end, the wife threw him out of the house. She got an injunction, non molestation injunction, occupation order. And he was quite shocked that she could do this. But you have to understand when you come to England, the culture is different. There's rule of law. Women have a lot of rights. Now, what I find happens in my family cases is that some of the time, women abuse the excessive rights they have in the family court, and they make false allegations quite often just to keep the fathers separate from the children. And what I want to say to people who are watching this program is you really need to remember that just because you divorce your husband doesn't mean that the children have to. They're biologically related to that man. And Section 1 of the Children Act 1989 says that any court that makes a decision involving children has to put the children's interests first. So it is accepted in all the family courts that it is in the interest of the child to have both mother and father in order to develop properly and to have a full assertive identity. Now, a lot of women usually don't understand the importance of the father for the child. Yes, I know there are some violent men, and I know there are some men who are drunk, and there are some men who are gamblers. We're
Hmm.
not talking about those. Even if there are some men like that, the family court's effort is still not to separate the father from the child. So they'll have supervised contact with the father, supported contact. The effort is to rebuild the relationship somehow or the other. But the men that I come across very often have been targeted unfairly. And I've asked some of my clients, did you really hit her? And they've confessed to me, I really wanted to, but I stopped myself because I knew she will dial 999 in 2 minutes and get me arrested. I knew her sister had done this, her friend had done this. So they told me honestly that they hadn't, but the way the women cook up the stories, some women, I should say, cook up the
Hmm.
stories. And in fact, I had one case where the woman was unbelievable because she started having an affair at work. She was in a very high powered job earning 100K plus. She started an affair because she was traveling a lot. And when she started an affair, she knew her family wouldn't want her to leave the husband and they had a child. So what she did was she started building evidence against him. So she started going to her doctor, reporting domestic violence. She started making reports to the police, and he was completely unaware this was happening. And in the end, to get rid of him and to tell her family, look, he was so violent for 2 years. And it was quite incredible because when we looked at the records and cross referenced everything, it was clear that she was telling lies because some of the time she said she had been abused by him, she wasn't even in the country. So when we put all the information together, it became clear at the end that it was all false allegations. And the problem is, a lot of the men can't get legal aid. In fact, in family cases, legal aid is very difficult to get. And now the biggest problem now is that women only get legal aid if there is a domestic violence issue. So there is incentive for them to allege domestic violence in order to get legal aid. And I think gradually the courts are also becoming aware of this problem. So there are all sorts of reasons. But my clients are men because I usually act for the vulnerable party, and anybody can be a vulnerable party. I'm not sexist in that way at all. And I don't believe all women are victims. Having said that, I know that women suffer a lot in many countries where they don't have a legal system like we do in England.
True, true. I'll just go through some comments, Huma, because I see there's a lot coming in and I don't want to go too far and miss it. Aisha Siddiq is watching, Sobia is here, Sohair is here. Thank you everyone for watching. If I see the comments, then I'm able to see who's watching. So Eamon Khwaja is here and she's saying 2 women are killed in this country as a result of domestic violence every week. So surely the women making false allegations are an incredibly small minority.
They're not a small minority. I think, unfortunately, the women who get killed are the ones who should go to the courts and try and get protection for themselves. Uh, the victims very often don't know how the system works. It's usually the very clever ones who know how the system works, like the one I just mentioned who was on 100K. There is a small minority. Violence is a very big issue, but in London alone, I think 85 or 90% of all murders are of men. So there are probably 20 men killed to 2 women who are killed. I don't think people understand the crime statistics in the same way. talked about this in great detail in my book. I've gone through all the statistics. So, in
Okay,
fact, I think 97% of all murder victims are actually male.
right. We will get to your book later as well. Masuma is here, Huma, our
How?
common friend. And Aisha Hussain is here, who's saying almost half of DV cases are male victims.
I don't
That's
think
the
it's half.
highest
No,
statistic.
no, no. I don't think it's half. It's less than that. It's less than that. I think it's more like, I don't know, 30% to 70% women.
Still quite a high
It is, of
rate.
course, it's quite high. Yeah, but you see, men are embarrassed to talk about it, so they don't report it in the same way
Come
that
forward. Yeah,
women are more encouraged to report it.
absolutely. Um, let's talk about another segment, which is gender inequality. And it's such a diverse topic. We can't contain everything in this small amount of time we have. But would you like to talk about or shed some light on the inequality in pay between men and women?
Well, like I was saying to you, in England, women have made a lot of progress. In England, every little girl gets up and goes to school, gets an education, can read and write. I think we have a 100% literacy rate in terms of the mainstream community. When I talk about England, I'm talking about mainly mainstream community and all the people who are here and who live here. Um, and I think there is a pay gap of about 21%. Women still only get 79% of what men get. And that is pretty much the only inequality left in England, in my view. In all other ways, women have caught up in other ways. Um, I think gender issues are very difficult because every country has its own culture. Now, we hear a lot about patriarchy. And I find that a lot of the time people confuse patriarchy with misogyny. Now, patriarchy is a system where men are supposed to protect and provide for women and children. It's a system that we all grew up in our childhood, our grandparents. Our grandmother would be at home, grandfather would be going out to work. And there was no inequality between the two because the role grandmother played at home was considered to be a very important one. Over the years, what we should have done was um, give more value to the work that was done at home by homemakers. Instead, we have given more value to money. We've become more mercenary over time. So we've devalued the work that is done at home. Now, in matriarchy, in real patriarchy, men do one thing, women do another thing, but neither is supposed to be more valuable. Both are supposed to be playing an equal role in the home and particularly in the upbringing of children. And a lot of women are very happy to stay at home and bring up their children. And I feel we tend to really criticize those type of women too much, the ones who are educated, and they're seen as not really important, not they don't matter when we talk about patriarchy. We only talk about the oppressive side of patriarchy. But we have to understand that patriarchy is a system that's chosen by a lot of women, and they're not forced into it. What women talk about when they complain about patriarchy are the oppressive things that happen, which is more misogyny. Misogyny is more about controlling women, hating women, victimizing women. And that's a different thing altogether. Women cannot collude in misogyny, but they collude in patriarchy and they collude willingly. So if a man and a woman are happy living life in a particular way, then why should we impose our views on them or our standards on them as long as they're happy? My grandmother was very happy. She had all the power. My grandfather used to come and give her his salary, and she spent it the way she wanted to. So I feel that we do stereotype people and we value and devalue pretty much on the basis of money and not on the basis of the actual contribution that is being made by men and women in a particular family. But again, that's something I've written about in great detail. I also feel that social media has contributed to a lot of misunderstanding because you see, you have educated people and you have uneducated people, but the most dangerous are the half educated people because they're not really fully informed, but they consider it necessary to spread information. It's like these posts that come into your inbox every day from somebody or the other. things that don't make sense. And I'll just give you one little example. I was in Pakistan in 2020 March when the women march was going on, and there was a big controversy around my Body, My Choice, which was translated in Urdu as Mera Jism, Meri Marzi. And it was seen as something where women are claiming sexual freedom and they want to run around with who they want. Actually, My Body, My Choice was a very particular slogan which started in Europe, and it was started by women who wanted to have a say in when they can have an abortion, and the authorities were legislating, and the women were vocal about they want their views to be taken into account when legislation is made. Because again, you see, in Europe we have rule of law, and it's very important. Women don't want to go against the rule of law, so they want to make sure that their voices are heard and laws are made according to their wishes and their desires. But it was completely mistaken and misinterpreted, and nobody actually. I saw a lot of TV shows as well in Pakistan around this, and it
Yeah.
was totally misconstrued and misrepresented as women wanting to freak out, when it was actually nobody talked about the origin of this slogan, where it came from. And again, I've put that in detail in my book.
Oh, is that a part of your book as well? Okay.
Also, they're under feminism. I've put Pakistani feminism, Indian feminism, Western feminism, and I've explained it all in detail how it all started. Because you see, in the West, feminism has always started around particular things. So, for example, in the 1900s, we had the suffragettes. They were campaigning for something very specific. They were campaigning for the vote. They wanted to have a say in who gets chosen to make the laws. Then they campaigned for equal property rights, because at one time, even in the West, property could only be owned by men. So it would be owned by a woman's father, and then it would pass straight to her husband when she gets married. So women campaigned to have property rights. Then later on in the 60s, you have Betty Friedan's book in America. I forget the name of it, but it really motivated a lot of women. And what she said in that book was, men and women both get educated, but women get educated to build a home, and the man goes to work. A lot of women are happy in doing that, but there are some women who are not, and they need careers. And this book became a bestseller. 5 million copies were sold overnight. And then a department was set up for women in America in the 60s. And Betty Friedan, I think, was made head of it, probably a punishment for writing the book. But it was all about how women should also have careers if they want to. And that's when um, the whole gender change happened. But the point I'm trying to make is, again, they were campaigning for something very specific. They were campaigning to have the right to work, to employment, which meant to have better childcare, to have creches at work, and so on. Whenever women have campaigned in the West, they've campaigned for something specific.
For a specific.
Now, in Pakistan, sadly, a lot of women are still campaigning for the right to stay alive. And that really saddens me. I think the situation in Pakistan and India for women is very bad, because I was preparing an asylum case once, and there was a report about women's attitudes in that case. And I was shocked to find that 87% of the women who were interviewed said that they thought nothing of being slapped by their husband in the normal course of things. Oh no, he loves us as well. Doesn't matter if he gives us a slap every now and then, or if he pushes. Women took that in their stride.
Accepted.
You know, in England, it's zero tolerance for any type of violence. But women themselves didn't think there was anything that untoward
Wrong with
about
it.
husband slapping them.
And
And that really shocked me. And that's what women are campaigning for, you know, a violence-free life, um, the right to stay alive, the right not to abort female fetuses, and so on and so forth.
true. So you did mention, Huma, in our previous conversation, you did some research in Pakistan. Was that?
Well, it was around this issue. In order to write my chapter on feminism in Pakistan, I
Oh,
did
okay.
research, and I actually found that it seems that Pakistani women's situation has worsened over the decades. Because when Pakistan was founded, Fatma Jinnah and Begum Liaquat Ali were two very dynamic, very, very highly educated professional women. Fatma Jinnah was a dentist. She had her own surgery in Bombay. For 7 years, she ran her own surgery. I mean, I don't know how many people actually know that. And Rana Liaquat Ali was also a very dynamic woman who worked as a teacher. That's how she met Liaquat Ali, who went to give a lecture at the college where she was a teacher, and they met, and then they got married. This is back in the 1920s and 30s, I think. But they, women were more dynamic in Pakistan even. And I don't know about India so much. I think position for women in India is slightly different, because when I went to India, I felt that there weren't so many dress restrictions on women in India. In Pakistan, there appears to be a dress restriction on women, in that they are supposed to be pretty invisible most of the time. It's very difficult for women in public space. And this is what I found through my research. And I was quite shocked at the fact. And then, even when I remember my mother and my aunts, there was a time they used to wear sleeveless and walk down the road and nobody would say anything. So there were more freedoms in my mother's time in Pakistan than there are now for my cousins and my nieces. Pakistan has gradually become very, very restrictive over the centuries. And whilst a lot of people there are proud that it's a moral country and so on the corruption index, it still comes, I think, at 140 or something. So there's a lot of hypocrisy, I think, in some societies,
Which
where
prevails.
corruption is not addressed, but women's dress is more important than the kind of corruption that's being carried out.
I will just again interrupt Huma and go through some comments. Sobia is saying very interesting discussion. Indeed, it is. Amuji is saying hello from US. And Ayman Khaja has a question. How do you foresee things changing in Pakistan, if at all?
That's a very difficult question. I don't know whether I should really answer that, but if you look at the first lady that we have in Pakistan currently, that should give you an idea of where Pakistan is heading in relation to women. So I think things are pretty difficult, and they are becoming more difficult now. But you see, I feel there's nothing we can do about it from, sitting in the West. We are working here, we're paying our taxes here. Any change in Pakistan will have to be brought by the men and women there.
Both.
What the women in Pakistan really need to do is to get egalitarian men on board and get them to change things. Because in England, for example, when the suffragettes wanted to campaign, they had some very good men at the time on board who were supporting them, like John Stuart Mill, who wrote a book called The Subjection of Women. And there he talked about all the inequalities women suffered. So if we want to change women's position, women have to stop alienating men and making them out to be the enemy, and get them on board, because we have to remember, whatever happens in Pakistan doesn't happen because men want it to happen that way. It happens because the systems want it to happen that way. And systems, I'm afraid, are put up by men and women both. So we have to stop alienating men and making them feel guilty about everything that happens to women. That's very counterproductive. We really need to take them on board, in Pakistan in particular. In England, we already have a very egalitarian system. In England, men don't expect women to cook for them, and men don't expect women to be their honor. Men over here take responsibility for their own honor. Their mother, sister, wife, daughter are nothing to do with their honor. The man his conduct is going to decide his honor, not his wife's conduct.
Yes. There's so many things to be addressed. But one thing, yes, of paramount importance is women have to get men on their side. They have to stop alienating themselves as a separate identity in a lot of things. Going back to what you said, First Lady, we won't discuss it, but regarding the wife of the president, Mrs. Alvi, I know for a fact she's doing a lot of work and a lot of good work. So there are women in the front as well who are doing it, but yet we need more. I was going to ask the questions regarding the distinction between patriarchy and misogyny, which you've gone through. But regarding misogyny, I was glad because I did some research. I didn't even know. In fact, Ayman Khwaja was the one who mentioned it. And then I did some research that it's going to be classed as a hate crime from autumn. And that's since the death of Sarah Everin, which was so sad. However, a pilot scheme has been running in Nottinghamshire since 2016. And according to a recent report in The Independent, the number of reported cases were rising, and they rose a lot from between April 16 and March 2018. However, the conviction rate was very low. It reported it as being one out of a cases, about 200 cases. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that the women being able to report it as a hate crime or incident from autumn nationwide will bear any fruitful results?
You see, the thing about laws is laws are made, and then it takes time for them to become effective because some people have to come forward, they have to report it, there are going to be some prosecutions, then there will be some more laws made, then judges will make some precedents. It takes time. It'll probably be 5 years or so before we know the full effect of this law, but it's a very welcome step because let me tell you, Shehla, we always hear a lot about racism because racism affects men. We don't hear enough about sexism. I have watched television programs about race where Asian men in particular are sitting around a table and their wives are standing behind them serving them food in a program where they're protesting against racism. And there's no awareness whatsoever of sexism. And that came as such a shock to me that the wives were actually standing behind obediently whilst the husband ate, and they allowed this to be filmed. You see, the problem is women don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, that's the real problem. The way women are conditioned in our society is it really needs to change if we're going to bring about any change. I mean, it doesn't happen in Western culture. It doesn't. You know, men and women cook together and eat together.
Hmm.
But this is one of the very big problems as I see them that needs to be addressed. Essentially, what I'm saying is all mothers need to teach both their sons and daughters to cook and to be able to feed themselves. We've got to stop this dependency culture where one has to be the giver and the other is the taker.
True. Very correctly said. Kamal Khan is here, very articulate, really enjoying listening to the discussion, of course. Okay, so in another recent interview, Huma, which is titled, Is England Still the Land of Dreams? And I really enjoyed listening to that. You alluded to the fact that how there's plenty of opportunity in UK for everyone. Agreed, disagreed. So I would like you to kind of shed some light. I'll go through my own experience. So I'm a first generation immigrant, or howsoever you call it, and I came here. I had to take my exams, work really hard to get to a place where I am. However, from time to time, I've felt that if I was raised here, or I didn't have an accent, or maybe a person of a different color, I could have maybe achieved more. Self reflected on it and thought, am I thinking I wasn't privileged, or did I not do something right? But I would really want to hear what you say, because you came here at the age of 10 or 11. And were you privileged? What are your top tips for someone who wants to achieve more and get onto a professional ladder and really achieve something?
Well, there is definitely a lot of opportunity for all men and women who come here. As you said, I came here in my childhood. So I feel, you see, it's an individual thing. What my experience may be very different from other people because, like I said to you, my parents divorced, my father abandoned us and went off. The minute he abandoned us, we were given a place to live by the local authority.
Mm.
So that was an advantage in this society that we were not left homeless on the street. We were immediately given a roof over our head. My mum used to work. She worked in factories. I used to go to school. If my mum hadn't worked, they would also have given her some sort of benefit. But she was always a very hardworking woman, and I think in a lot of ways I learned from that. Now, this country is a meritocracy. If you have a brain, they will push you up. If you don't have a brain, then no matter what happens, you're not going to succeed. And you can come from a very privileged family. You can be a diplomat's son, but if you don't have the brain, or daughter, you won't be able to succeed in this society. Now, despite being the child of a single mother living on a council estate for most of my life, I was able to go to university, get an LLB. Then I was able to go to bar school and get my bar finals, and then become a barrister. Now, when I was studying for my bar finals, there were a lot of overseas students, and the Pakistanis were all from very privileged families in Pakistan, and they were paying 10, 20,000 fees for their course. I wasn't paying a penny. In fact, the government was paying me maintenance money to make sure that I don't have to work and take away from my education. The taxpayer has made me what I am today, and I'm very grateful to them for that. I was able to succeed because I was in England. Had I been in Pakistan, I am sure that my mother would have had to marry me off at 17 and so on. She wouldn't have been able to, she wouldn't have been able to afford to get me educated and so on. And I don't come from a particularly rich family. So I was only able to succeed because I was in England. And the taxpayers provide for people who have ability but don't have the means to get where they want. So, in that way, and yes, I had to work very, very hard. I actually used to work in the evenings and study during the day for a long period of time because I didn't really like my mother working very long hours. So I said to her, I'll do some work and we'll manage. And we actually went through some extreme poverty as well. But we always had enough to eat and we always had a home. And then once I became educated and I had my own career, um, things just became better and better. I find that if you have ability, then race is not an issue and gender is not an issue. When I go to court, I'm always prepared. I know my cases inside out. And I have to say, I have always been respected by judges. 99% of judges treat me with a lot of respect. I have never felt racism or sexism from them. The court staff absolutely loves me, most of them, because I go in, I spend time chatting to them. They have really interesting lives, some of them. And their lives been made difficult because at one time they only used to run one court. Now they run two or three courts. So they're running around in circles, and I always try to accommodate them and they try to accommodate me. But I have grown up in this country. I haven't faced any racism, but I have faced sexism, but that's not from mainstream community.
Hmm. Hmm. Very well said. Thank you for sharing, Huma. Eamon is saying your life story is incredibly inspiring. Thank you for sharing. We need more stories about the success of women of color. Absolutely. I'm coming to the last segment, and I would like you to tell us a bit about your book, A Love Letter to Men and Women. You've gone through a lot of the part of it, especially where and how can we access it? Because I've tried since we last spoke, I've not been able to get a hand on it. So if
Well,
you could
now
kindly
that
let us know.
lockdown is nearly over, I'm probably going to go around various places and do launches of my book. I'm hoping to do, 8 to 10 launches in different places. It will become available on a website called the Literary Circle. So if you go onto Google and type the Literary Circle, there should be a link that takes you to my book. Now, the book is very dear to my heart because I wanted to write a book about the breakdown of relationships, the breakdown of love between men and women. And you see, I've always been a romantic. I always believed in love. And although I never ever had any love from my father, I think I can say that my husband has more than made up for that deprivation in my life. Um, I've been married for nearly 30 years myself to the same man.
Mashallah.
So, but at the same time, I went through a very acrimonious divorce with my parents. So I've seen both sides of the picture, the very negative side and the very positive side. In my cases, I see marriages breaking down all the time. Very often, the couple are still in love with each other, but they can't live together. Many times, outsiders are interfering, and the result is that relationships are breaking down. Now, I've stumbled upon some research which suggests that long life and health are related to the quality of our personal relationships. So if you're in a happy relationship, you're more likely to be healthy, happy, and live for much longer. And this research has been done
Yeah.
at Harvard. And I have mentioned it in the introduction to my book. So, what I wanted to do was take a lot of stereotypes and turn them inside out. I wanted to take a lot of issues and discuss them properly and fairly. For example, in one part of my book, I've also discussed pedophilia. Now, we're all disgusted by pedophilia,
Mhm.
but it goes on. A lot of the time, people are ignorant. We only hear
A
about it.
reality.
Sorry?
Sorry, I said it's a sad reality, but it exists, and it's good to
A
be
lot of the
aware.
time, a lot of the time, we only hear about it when a child is brutally murdered.
Hmm.
What people don't know is it goes on at a much lower level where children are not murdered or harmed, but it is still, it breaks their soul.
Yes.
Very often it's from a close family member. But the part that not many people know is that there are many pedophiles who don't want to do what they do. If there was more help available for them, if we tried to help those people, we could perhaps change the way they behave. And I have written that whole process in the book under a chapter called Children. So if I can just give you a little introduction to my book, uh, there are 12 chapters in it. The first four chapters are about men. So there is male privilege. We can't deny that there is male privilege. So the first four chapters are about men, male privilege. Um, and the second, sort of the middle four chapters are about women. They're about matriarchy. And I've put a special chapter called phylogeny. Now, we hear about misogyny, but nobody ever talks about phylogeny. Phylogeny is the opposite of misogyny. It is the love for women, the love that men have, love that has made them do great things like give up the throne, like Edward
Hmm.
did for Mrs. Simpson. That was phylogeny. You know, a king built the Taj Mahal for his queen. That
Hmm.
was phylogeny. John Stuart Mill wrote a book called The Subjection of Women in the 18th Century. That was phylogeny. That started the ball rolling in England. We
Hmm.
don't hear enough about how much men have loved women over the centuries. And I've got a whole chapter on that. And
Wow.
when I was doing my research, the most surprising thing for me was that these issues have been addressed in many countries like Pakistan and India as well. In Pakistan, there was a comedian called Rangila, whose real name was Muhammad Saeed. He made a film called Aurat Raj, where he shows that by an act of nature, men and women reverse roles. The men stay at home and the women go out to work, and the women bully the men. He's just completely changed the roles. And it was an incredible film. He got Wahid Murad to act in it, and he got Sultan Rahi to act in it, and the two of them did an item number in the film.
Oh wow.
I find that so incredible. Then in 1905 in India, this woman called Qudsiya Begum wrote a book called Sultana's Dream, where again she showed gender change. And she wrote that book to show off her English skills to her husband. It's just incredible what she wrote and the reason that she wrote. So I've put all of that in my book. Now, we also have Hillary Clinton, who failed to become president of the USA. I have written about the Nawab Begums of Bhopal. In Bhopal, from 1819 to 1919, four women ruled as the rulers of Bhopal, and they were from the same family: mother, daughter, granddaughter, great granddaughter.
Hmm.
And they did incredible things when they ruled. One of them sorted all the sewage system out in Bhopal. Another one built libraries. Another one sorted out the legal system. And their lives are so incredible. And they are all the great grandmothers of Saif Ali Khan, who's a Bollywood actor. That's the women in his family. And people would sadly know it more by that reference than they would know just about the Nawab Begums of Bhopal. But I've put a lot of role models because my daughter's friend said to me, "We don't study about the Asian role models at all. So can you please put some of them in the book?" So specifically in response to that, I tried to find as many role models as I could, and I put them in. My book is very much a bridge between men and women. I have been very fair, and I have said things that a lot of people who want to be politically correct don't want to say, but
Hmm.
somebody has to say it. So I've said that if we women want equality, then we've also got to take the responsibility. Now, I find a lot of women talk about equality, they talk about working and earning money, but if they go on a date with a man, they always expect the man to pick up the tab. That's not equality. You can't have equality when you want and have chivalry when you want. You have to be willing to pick up the bill. Women have to pay for themselves. You have to take responsibility. That's equality. You have to earn a living. You have to contribute to the family pot. That's equality. It
Mm,
seems a lot of women don't really understand. The women who talk a lot about feminism and patriarchy, but they don't really understand that the reason they don't pay the bill is because of patriarchy, because men take
mm,
responsibility and they pay for women. In fact, I was very amused to see a particular woman, an actress in India, wearing a T-shirt about patriarchy, and it said something like, "Roses are red, violets are blue. Let's smash patriarchy, me and you." Now, what I had read about the woman was that she was living with her boyfriend who was quite well off, and she had supposedly, allegedly, this was reported, she had his bank card and she used to spend his money the way she wanted. And she had got bank cards for her whole family. Brother, mother, father were all using this man's money. And the same woman then wears a t shirt about patriarchy and smashing it when she had taken full advantage of patriarchy before that. So we really need to be very clear that whenever we have a right, we also have a responsibility. And if we are not willing to take the responsibility, then we're going to have trouble getting that right too.
wonderful, wonderfully said. Rachna has been watching. I wanted to mention that she was saying thank you for sharing all with us. Before we finish this off, Huma, I want to mention the fact that, and I want the viewers who don't know this, how proficient your command of Urdu is. And to the point where it's so impressive that your daughter, whom you raised here, has done A levels in Urdu on top of her mainstream studying. And she speaks it fluently, so that the credit goes to you as well. Tell us about your love for Urdu and बाकी की गुफ्तगू थोड़ी उर्दू में हो जाए because I want to hear you if you want to अपनी कोई अगर आपकी उर्दू शायरी है या कोई मिसरा या कोई कोटेशन कहना चाहती हैं तो प्लीज एंड विद दैट वुड बी लवली
Well, मेरा पैगाम मोहब्बत है यहाँ तक पहुँचे
ब्यूटीफुल जबरदस्त
और मेरी किताब का जो आखिरी चैप्टर है वो लव उसका नाम है और उसमें मैंने लव के बारे में जितनी मालूमात मुझे मिली वो लिख दी और वो इस किताब का दिल है जो लव पे है उसमें लव फॉरगिवनेस हर चीज उसके अंदर है फॉरगिवनेस इज अनदर इशू दैट वी हैव अ लॉट ऑफ प्रॉब्लम्स विद फॉरगिविंग पीपल तो वो सब चीजें मैंने अपनी किताब में लिख दी हैं और शायरी का मुझे बहुत ज़्यादा शौक है और गालिब मेरे पसंदीदा शायर हैं और गालिब की शायरी मैं बहुत पढ़ती रहती हूँ
In fact, Masuma has just commented Ghalib, and I thought, why she put Ghalib down?
she knows me.
अच्छा, sorry, I cut you. Please continue.
जहाँ तक मेरी बेटी का ताल्लुक है, हमारे घर में हमेशा से बड़ी मौसीकी की महफिलें होती हैं, मुशायरे होते हैं। जब से वो छोटी थी, जब से उसने आँख खोली, उसने हमारे घर में उर्दू का एक बहुत स्टेटस देखा, उर्दू को बड़ी अहमियत दी जाती थी। तो उसे खुद ब खुद शौक पैदा हुआ। एक दफ़ा मैंने उसको सबसे पहले तो वो सिखाई, लब पे आती है दुआ बन के तमन्ना मेरी और वो पूरी उसको ज़बानी याद हो गई। उसके बाद हम एक मुशायरे में हम गए और मैं स्पेशल गेस्ट थी, तो मेरी बेटी भी मेरे साथ गई, छोटी-सी थी उस वक़्त 6-7 साल की। तो वो मेरे साथ बैठी, प्रिज़ाइड किया उसने मुशायरे के ऊपर। लोगों ने अपनी शायरी सुनाई तो मुझसे कहा, अम्मा मुझे भी शायरी सुनानी है। तो मैंने कहा, बेटा आप कौन-सी शायरी? मैं लब पे आती है। फिर उसने माइक पे जाकर लब पे आती है दुआ पढ़ी। उस वक़्त आप यकीन करें उस महफ़िल में जो शायर बैठे हुए थे उनमें से एक ने उसी वक़्त उस पर एक ग़ज़ल लिख दी।
Oh.
पर पन्निया है मेरा नाम, मैं हूँ उर्दू की सहेली, मैं हूँ गालिब की पहेली और वो उन्होंने लिख के हमें वही दे दी और मैंने उसे फ्रेम करा के रखा क्योंकि वो इतना एक प्यारा एक्सपीरियंस था। तो मैंने हमेशा से अपनी बेटी को उर्दू और अंग्रेज़ी के स्टेटस में कोई फ़र्क नहीं महसूस करने दिया। मैंने उस दोनों को हमेशा बराबर रखा اور اس نے پھر ہم نے فلمیں بھی بہت دیکھی, ہم فلمیں بھی بہت دیکھتے تھے, ہمیں بہت شوق تھا, ہم لوگ بھی گرو انٹو دس کلچر فلموں کا. تو فلموں کی وجہ سے اسے کافی, میرا خیال ہے فلمیں کیونکہ ہم نے اتنی دیکھی, اور ہمارے گھر میں ٹیلی ویژن چینلز بھی تھے, اور ہم بڑے اردو کے پلیز بھی دیکھتے تھے, اور بڑی ڈیٹیکٹیو سٹوریز اور ایسی چیزیں, CID اور اس طرح کی چیزیں ہم دیکھتے تھے. تو اس کا اردو کا جو لب و لہجہ ہے وہ بڑا اچھا ہو گیا. بلکہ میں آپ کو بڑی مزے کی بات بتاؤں, جب وہ چھوٹی تھی تو میں اس کی اردو کو ٹھیک کرتی تھی, اس کے تلفظ کو میں ٹوکتی رہتی تھی. تو جب اس نے اپنا A لیول پاس کر لیا تھا تو اس کے بعد یہ رے میں اسے تھوڑی سی پرابلم ہوتی ہے, تو رے کی جگہ وہ رے کہہ دیتی ہے, اڑنا اڑنا. تو اس نے کسی جگہ پہ اس کے منہ سے رے نکل گیا. میں نے کہا پنیا, نو اٹس ناٹ رے, اٹس رے, سے اڑنا. اینڈ شی سیڈ اما گریڈ A لے کے دے دیا ہے نا آپ کو, اب آپ مجھے کریکشن کر سکتی. یعنی آپ یہ یقین کریں کہ ایک ہی دن اس کو آکسفورڈ میں داخلہ ملا, اسی دن پتا چلا کہ اسے آکسفورڈ میں داخلہ مل گیا, اور اسی دن اس کا اردو کا رزلٹ آیا. تو پہلے آکسفورڈ کا پتا چلا تو میں بڑا خوش ہوئی, میں بڑا ہنسی, اسے گلے لگایا, بڑی خوش ہوئی. اس کے تھوڑی دیر بعد آئی, کہنے لگی میرا اردو کا رزلٹ آ گیا, مجھے گریڈ A ملا ہے, اور میں پھوٹ پھوٹ کے رونے لگی. خوشی کے مارے مجھے اتنا آیا. تو وہ کہنے لگی کہ اماں آپ میرے آکسفورڈ جانے پر نہیں روئی, آپ اردو پہ کیوں روئی؟ میں نے کہا کیونکہ تمہارا آکسفورڈ جانا تو ڈن تھا, دونوں ماں باپ تمہارے پروفیشنل ہیں, تمہاری اسکولنگ اتنی اچھی ہوئی ہے, وہ تو ڈن تھا, لیکن اس ماحول میں رہ کر تم اردو میں گریڈ لو گے, یہ بڑا مشکل کام تھا. اور اس لیے مجھے خوشی سے رونا آ گیا کہ یہ مشکل کام کر لیا.
بہت مشکل کام ہے, اور آپ نے اتنی زبردست وے میں کیا ہے. آسان نہیں ہے. میں نے خود بچے یہاں ریز کر رہی ہوں, اور انڈین اردو فلمز دکھا کے کچھ اردو ان کو آتی ہے, لیکن واقعی میں ہیٹس آف ٹو یو فار ڈوئنگ دیٹ. آپ غالب کی کوئی مصرع شیئر کرنا چاہیں گی؟ یا
غالب کا مصرع, غالب کے تو اتنے مصرے ہیں کہ, اور مجھے ایسے وقتوں پہ کبھی کچھ یاد نہیں آتا, لیکن ایک میرا بہت ہی فیوریٹ ہے, محبت میں نہیں ہے فرق جینے اور مرنے کا, محبت میں نہیں ہے فرق جینے اور مرنے کا, اسی کو دیکھ کر جیتے ہیں غالب جس کا پھر پہ دم نکلے.
واہ واہ واہ,
سما سمجھ جائے گی کہ میں نے یہ شعر کیوں پڑھا ہے.
اچھا, معصومہ کو میں پوچھتی ہوں. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. ایک comment تھا about the book, so I will go over it again. It's available on the Literacy Circle. Is that correct?
Literary Circle.
Literary Circle.
Literary Circle.
The Literary Circle.
لیکن میں اپنی فیس بک پہ ہمیشہ پبلک پوسٹ لگاتی ہوں اباؤٹ دا بک. تو میں جب بھی کوئی لانچ کروں گی تو میں لگا دوں گی, اور میرا خیال ہے ایک بڑا لانچ سمر میں ہاؤس آف کامنز میں کروں گی, تو وہاں پہ سب لوگ آ سکتے ہیں, اور پروبیبلی میں ایک انر ٹیمپل میں بھی شاید کروں. سو میں سب پبلک پوسٹ پہ لگا دوں گی, پیپل کین کیپ چیکنگ, مگر ایٹ دا مومنٹ اٹ کین بی obtained فرام دا لٹریری سرکل لنڈن. یا اگر لوگوں کو چاہیے تو مجھے اگر ان باکس کر دیں تو میں I will guide them to the right place.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show, enlightening us. آپ کا اتنا busy schedule ہے, and thank you so much for giving us the time, and I'm sure people have loved this conversation. There are so many comments. I'm sorry I could not go through all of them. I have to say, as I admit, I was a bit nervous because this was the domain was kind of out of my comfort zone. Not that you are daunting, you are lovely. I loved talking to you before as well. So I must say a special thanks to Ayman Khwaja and Michelle Hughes and Tareem for supporting me. And thank you, viewers, for watching and for commenting. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you.